most recent years, Dungeons & Dragons has been taking the world by storm. From animations dedicated to learning how to play, produced web series actually playing the game, dozens of TV episodes based around the game, and yes, even nearly every RPG video game trying to recapture the experience. So naturally for this list, we'll be focusing on the official and non-official titles that come the closest to recapturing the spirit of D&D. I'll be basing my choices in terms of turn-based and initiative-style gameplay, player choice/freedom, RPG elements, dungeon crawling, swords and sorcery aesthetic, and party combat. Also, just for fun, I'll be comparing each of these games to a particular kind of dungeon master. And here's the big thing for these games, it also has to be good. Because like actual D&D, if you're going to be crowded in a shadowy basement with your neighbor down the block, the least you could be doing is having fun.
It's D&D!
Champions of Norath. Been a while since we've seen you. It was listed in my top 10 co-op games and number 46 in my top 50 favorite games of all time. And yes, it does have local and online co-op, but we're here to see how close it compares to D&D. Well, for the most part, this is an action RPG dungeon crawler. At the start of the game, you pick one of 5 classes and you gain unique abilities depending on which class you choose. Barbarians have high strength, clerics use healing magic, shadow knights can use both magic and melee in a balanced set. The majority of the game is focused on building your character via ability trees, fighting enemies, and exploring dungeons. And that's pretty much it. The one thing you'll see on this list is the combination of new and old mechanics that will make them more unique compared to other games. Even the premise of the story is pretty basic, with you trying to aid elves in a war against orcs. That quickly descends into utter lunacy with underworlds and bright shining beaches and suns while underground. Yeah, the story is really weird. There are other elements such as weapon customization, item weight, and stat bonuses that are familiar to D&D players too. Not to say the game is bad or anything, it's really enjoyable. But when it comes to D&D, the options available are pretty run-of-the-mill, and the setting is your normal swords and sorcery. At least it has co-op play, which is actually pretty Dungeons & Dragons-y in that regard.
Fun fact, this game actually takes place in EverQuest's universe.
When was the last time you heard of someone playing EverQuest?
That's fair.
It's D&D!
Do you have buddies that love board games but with no way to meet up with them in person? Steam's got you covered. With this fun little VR sandbox, you can connect with your online compadres for a little fun with nearly thousands of tabletop games at your disposal. From classics built in to licensed games remade by workshop users, and even the really obscure games you saw in some other media. And the best part, cleaning up is as easy as 1, 2...
I knew you were gonna do that! It's so satisfying. Hey, Jesus did it, so I can too.
What does this have to do with D&D? In the Tabletop Workshop, dedicated fans actually make the effort to bring some D&D elements into Tabletop Simulator, including, but not limited to, figurines, specially designed tables, actual playable D&D board games, and some impressively unique dungeons. Not only that, but one of the official DLCs, Red Dragon Inn, actually has a D&D-like setting where you and a few chums are having a little victory party at the tavern for a night of drinks, gambling, and roughhousing.
Just drink, I like it. Another!
The reason Tabletop Simulator is only at number 9 is that while it does have a lot to offer, it can also get a bit tedious with the physics and the interface. If you're not playing in VR, you gotta be able to know which keyboard function to use and be really precise when handling cards. And setting up custom dungeons, not as fun as you'd expect.
That just sounds like D&D with extra steps!
Ooh la la.
Still, once you get the hang of it, these are just small quips for what's essentially a fun experience with an immersive virtual tabletop. It's like playing with that dungeon master who has a ton of gimmicks and macros coded into Roll20 that more slow down the game than speed it up, but screw it, you're still having fun.
It's D&D! Fighting with the legends of yore.
Weirdly enough, even though D&D has produced a lot of official video games, not a lot of them get the banana about capturing the spirit of the original pen and paper game. They try to appeal more to the masses by favoring hack and slash, real-time combat over customization and turn-based gameplay that made the original so unique. Thankfully, some of them actually do get the picture. Case in point, the Neverwinter games. Set in the city of Neverwinter from the Forgotten Realms campaigns, Neverwinter Nights 2 tells the story of an orphaned adventurer and their party investigating the mysterious silver shards and their connection to the King of Shadows. If you can't already tell, this sequel is actually an adaptation of the D&D 3.5 rules, inheriting both the good and the bad that edition brought forth. In terms of good, you'll get a ton of ways to interact with the environment and a pretty good customization system, with your choice of up to 16 races and 12 classes. As for the bad, the gameplay gets slowed down really quickly with trap checks every 30 feet, and things can get cluttered and complicated real fast, made even worse by the technical glitches.
Cause who doesn't love glitches when you're trying to roll a nat 11, am I right?
If I could describe this game's Dungeon Master style, I'd say it's someone who follows the rules a little too closely and doesn't allow for much homebrew, but you let it slide because the story and NPCs are well written. And really, I'd say the good outweighs the bad for a near faithful adaptation of D&D. Unfortunately, you'll have to play this one on your own nowadays since the multiplayer provider shut down the game's online functions in 2012. Guess you can't really split the party if there is no party.
It's D&D. Fighting with the legends of yore.
One great thing about D&D is the different modules giving different flavors of adventure. There's the module for tryhards, there's the module for edgelords, there's the module for those who think they're playing Skyrim, and then there's... Best part is, this has always been the case. If you were a D&D fan in the late 90s and early 2000s, you probably played one of the many successful RPGs from the developer of Black Isle Studios. Starting with Baldur's Gate in 1998, the company started releasing many other separate titles using the same engine. This meant you were basically playing other D&D modules as, from a passing glance, these games look rather similar. That's not a bad thing, as the engine for the time was great, especially because the games all had a good focus on character choice and dialogue. Each game from this sub-series, while similar, stood out for their own reasons among fans. Baldur's Gate was a classic D&D 2nd edition romp with fantastic characters, globe-trotting adventure, and celestial daddy issues. Icewind Dale was like Baldur's Gate, only for munchkins. Planescape Torment went the more narrative route, having one of the most dialogue-heavy entries here. Heck, I'll even consider Fallouts 1 and 2 to be a good RPG example. While not swords and sorcery themed, it does hold a lot of the same elements like the previous games I mentioned. The best part about these games is just how impactful they were. Many RPGs of today strive to replicate the feeling that these older games made you experience. It was like playing with a dungeon master who had read all the lore books and then proceeded to write 3 more for good measure. The worlds of each of these titles suck you into it, each one dripping with character and charm. Most of these games have received high-definition remasters that you can get on GOG or Steam, so thankfully even newer generations will be able to experience these games. Assuming they make it past the antiquated user interface.
You mean you have to use your hands? That's like a baby's toy.
It's D&D. Fighting with the legends of yore.
Ah, we gotta talk about Obsidian. Took longer than I thought.
Pillars of Eternity 2 is what happens when you take developers who worked on Black Isle games and have them make a modern RPG. This is kind of what happened since some Black Isle employees went to Obsidian, and you know what I mean. In this game, you play a Watcher who can read the souls of humans and call upon their memories. The main goal is to chase after the God of Light, who may or may not be planning something bad, and of course, you're contracted by the God of Death to do it. As normal with these games, you have your strong character creator, choices and consequences, and allies who you can bond or mess with as a result of your choices. And of course, everything is text-based, so dialogue and story progression are done via a storybook format, where you must choose which character does which action in a particular situation. What makes Pillars 2 a little different is the focus on sea exploration. As you're progressing through the Deadfire Archipelago, quest is almost entirely on a boat as you explore locals and sail from place to place. Think Pirates of the Caribbean meets Dragon Age. Not to say the actual locals aren't varied, because you got the normal ice, desert, volcano, ruins, and deserted island areas that are all in RPGs. It's like if a dungeon master saw the homebrew modules that the previous guy made and wanted to update them for modern sensibilities. Since it's also a sequel, your choices from the first game can influence story events in this one, so it has that added bonus, combining sea exploration, a more modern look, and keeping the classic D&D storytelling customization, plus Obsidian, ultimately highlights how great of a game it is.
Too bad Obsidian isn't making Baldur's Gate 3. I mean, the guys that got to make the new one are good and all, it's just... we'll get to them, trust me.
It's D&D. Fighting with the legends of yore.
Dungeon crawling is a snap when you can't fall prey to a single trap.
Long ago in gaming history, there was a popular game genre called the dungeon crawler. You would move a single character or party through a grid-like maze in first person, often fighting monsters while navigating the labyrinth you found yourself in. Games like Akalabeth World of Doom or Might and Magic are good examples of the origins of this genre. A lot of these games were inspired by D&D as they were trying to recreate that feeling of exploring a dungeon or a fortress filled with monsters. The genre has died down a bit over time as it was a product of its time due to limited tech and memory space. However, some developers have still tried their hand at making a modern dungeon crawler, and no better example of this comes to mind than Almost Human's Legend of Grimrock 2. The first Legend of Grimrock was released in April 2012 to positive reviews, citing that it faithfully recreated the gameplay of old-school RPGs into the modern era. The second game was originally planned as DLC, but when the team realized their ambitions were bigger than the current engine would allow, they went and made a full-fledged sequel that improved on every aspect. Maps now had multiple levels to them, adding in vertical tactics, character customization was expanded with new classes and skills, and the graphics got a major upgrade as well. But what makes Legend of Grimrock 2 such a great D&D game? I'd say it's because it plays much like a classic module setup. In the second game, your party is washed up on shore after a storm destroys the ship they were imprisoned on. Classic D&D setup. From there, you have to explore the island, learning about its secrets, battling monsters, and solving puzzles. The character creation complexity allows you to have some wacky combination of characters like a minotaur wizard or an elf who's a farmer and quite out of his element here. You move in a grid-like fashion, as do enemies, all in real time, so battling is usually a dance of attacking and dodging. Sort of like having the world's most impatient and unforgiving DM.
You see a group of skeletons 3 blocks ahead of you. What do you do? You took too long and skipping your turn. The skeleton's attacking for 6 damage. What do you do? I cast too slow. Skip turn.
What gives Legends of Grimrock 2 a big plus for me is that the developers released the modding tools for the game, allowing players to make their own games entirely from the engine itself. Some dedicated modders have made entire games of their own, which brings Legends of Grimrock 2 even closer to feeling of playing around a D&D. Just remember to stock up on food and keep your torch lit when delving into the unknown. And to move quickly, the DM is starting to get restless again.
It's D&D. Fighting with the legends of yore.
So, honest question. Is there anything more nerdy than a Star Wars RPG? Yeah, I thought not.
Take 2 parts Star Wars, 1 part D&D, and 1 part BioWare magic. Stir in a pot, put in the oven for 3 years, and what do you get? Knights of the Old Republic. Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, or better known by its acronym KOTOR, is a turn-based RPG. Yes, despite appearances of it being closer to an action RPG, KOTOR actually employs a round-based combat system that even has D20 rolls, just like D&D. Don't believe me? You can actually find the rolls and modifiers in the menu of the game for each action. Both games have you control initially unnamed Jedi that you can, admittedly limitedly, modify. To start with, you pick either Soldier, Scout, or Scoundrel. Nice alliteration, BioWare. Then later on, you can prestige class into a Jedi Guardian, good for direct combat, a Jedi Sentinel, striking a balance between lightsabers and Force use, and Jedi Consular, who focuses almost exclusively on the Force. But no D&D game is complete without a party, and boy do we have some doozies. We have a pick of the litter from bounty hunters to assassin droids, Jedi Masters, and even former Sith. Heck, you even get to have a Sith Lord as a party member. No spoilers on who. KOTOR's party members really paint a wide picture of the Star Wars universe if you take the time to learn from them. Funnily enough, one of the criteria for this list is a swords and sorcery aesthetic, and Star Wars kinda still fits the bill, well, with all the space sorcerers, space rogues, and space paladins.
Weapons are part of my religion.
This is like playing with a dungeon master who wants to re-flavor everything from medieval to futuristic, which is a real thing I'm way too scared to try.
It's D&D. Fighting with the legends of yore.
Unlike the Neverwinter Nights titles, Neverwinter, dear Heronius, that's confusing, is its own little independent nation. This time, it's a mostly free-to-play MMORPG set, yet again, in the titular Forgotten Realms city in search of forgotten secrets and lost treasure, but following the 4th edition rules instead of 3 or 3.5. You remember me saying how official D&D video games often struggle with being able to recapture the charm of the original pen and paper game? Well, Cryptic Studios, the team behind this MMO, boasts that Neverwinter actually promises an authentic D&D experience. How'd they do with keeping that promise?
Hey, that's pretty good.
For starters, it goes through a multitude of modules from Fury of the Feywild to Uprising, giving you plenty of different campaigns and updates to really spice up your gameplay. Heck, they've adapted official D&D modules such as Curse of Strahd and Storm King's Thunder. And not only can you customize your characters, but players can also generate their own stories and quests, which, when you think about it, is one of the best parts of D&D in the first place. The developers like to put a lot of emphasis on the writing, saying that Neverwinter isn't like a typical MMO. However, it's still an MMO and suffers the crutches that come with the title. It's only as fun with friends around, and you've always got the one player who's got to butt into your business. Overall, Neverwinter MMO feels like it's run by two DMs who trade off every now and again. The MMO says the DM who doesn't care much about the world and lore, rather the gameplay, while the actual D&D half is the DM that railroads you into a neat story but has specific ways for you to get things done. It's like World of Warcraft with a different skin. And yet, it still adds up to one of the most faithful titles in the official D&D video game lineups.
It's D&D. Fighting with the legends of yore.
A lot of RPGs that try to emulate D&D do so by focusing on the combat entirely. While combat can be the most visually entertaining part, most fans of role-playing games are there for the first element: role-playing. The game makers at BioWare were well known for focusing on this element with this in their past successes. Games such as Jade Empire, Mass Effect, and in 2014, Dragon Age Origins. The first in what would be one of BioWare's biggest series, Dragon Age Origins has been lauded by many for its great characters, its deep crafted world building, and its extensive role-playing elements. What made the first so great is just how much the origin of your character mattered to the story. Your ability to make choices and even some unique actions could only happen if you had a very specific background, like being able to marry Alistair if you were a human noble, or being able to play politics in the Dwarven court if you previously were one. The next in the series, Dragon Age 2, would be a lot smaller in scope due to the short production time that EA gave BioWare to make it. Instead, you were given a pre-generated character to roleplay as, in this case Hawk, a recent refugee from the first story setting. More focus was given to the combat, making an entirely new system that had some of the fanbase split on its creation. However, BioWare would go back to focus more on the role-playing element with the installment of Dragon Age Inquisition, expanding the scope of the game again and making you the leader of a group trying to bring order to a large portion of the world, all while attempting to prevent Armageddon. What gives these games their D&D feel would definitely be the world's setting and characters. BioWare is no stranger to making good characters. It's your interactions with them and the way they react to your choices that really brings the whole game a spark of life. Though especially with the later ones in the franchise, playing these games makes you feel like no matter what you chose, the DM is going to find some way to screw you over. Going to fight the big bad? Well, your best friends sacrificed themselves for you. Oh, you like this party member? Well, they became a terrorist. Honestly, that best describes the world of Dragon Age as well. A bunch of people dealing with a bad situation and some of them making it worse. Wherever the DM is at this game, they just like watching you squirm and saying, "Woo, consequences!"
Good. Good.
Kingdoms of Amalur. Only 3 classes, but gives you a little breathing room and good aesthetic. Tales of Candlekeep, Tomb of Annihilation. It's like the D&D board game, which you play when you don't have time for D&D. It feels like a dungeon master had a bad day and he's taking it out on the players by throwing non-stop crap at them. Board Game Online, turn-based board game featuring mystical sci-fi elements and abilities that allow you to be a massive troll to your other players. Suikoden 3, not much in terms of player agency, but the combat system is definitely similar. Shadowrun, Dragonfall, and Hong Kong. Kind of like a BioWare light game with good turn-based combat and character customization. Kind of lean towards Hong Kong as the better of the two.
It's D&D. Fighting with the legends of yore.
When it comes to D&D, what do players remember the most? The characters, the world, or maybe it's the story that ties it all together? What if I told you there was a game that did well on all these aspects and plays like it was written by a DM who thought about every crazy decision you might make? And surprisingly enough, plays more like Pathfinder 2nd Edition than D&D.
Inconceivable!
That game would have to be Divinity Original Sin 2. DOS 2 starts off golden with a character creator that has a lot of customization, even giving your character personality traits that can affect dialogue choices. You can also pick one of their pre-made characters if you have no imagination. But if you decide to create your own, these pre-made characters will be your companions. And while BioWare is well known for creating great characters, I would have to say that Larian Studios went even further. The companions you pick will frequently talk amongst themselves, interact with major NPCs as you go along the story, and can sometimes drastically change some of the side quests. And each one has a very personal story that lasts throughout the entire game, and depending on your choices and your companion's story, they could either be your best friend or your worst enemy by the end boss. The level of detail and customization extends to the battle system as well. One of the selling points of the original Sin was that your abilities could chain together to make some devastating environmental combos. In my first playthrough, I played as a Pyromancer, big surprise, and Hydromancer for healing. I played as a sort of red mage who could deal damage but also heal my party. I did things like have an archer spread a bunch of oil on the ground and then I'd follow up with a fireball, igniting the enemies and the ground around them. Or how about causing a rainstorm and electrifying it to paralyze enemies, then freeze it solid when they run at me. Of course, enemies can pull these same tactics on you, so you have to balance countering your opponent's combos all the while setting up your own. What's great is that you can use nearly all of these abilities outside of the game, and they can even open up some pathways or help you solve puzzles, or just screw around with the other NPCs. The combat wasn't the only system to have a lot of love and detail put into it. The dialogue system is just as verbose and developed. Your skills, character traits, and even past choices can unlock whole new options for you to talk about with NPCs, or even convince them to help you. You can even have your companions step in and take over the conversation, sometimes to your benefit and other times to your detriment. The fact that Larian Studios went above and beyond with the dialogue options shows that they have some darn good writers on staff. All in all, Divinity Original Sin 2 delivers on everything a D&D nerd would love to experience in game format. And thanks to them allowing the dev tools to be available to the public, many modders have continued adding more to an already amazing D&D experience, which makes it the best D&D game not only because of how well it's made, but because of all the adventures you can then make for your own friends.
I'm the Fiery Joker, and I cast Fireball! Nat one.
Hey everyone, this is Josh. If you like this video, please like, subscribe, leave a comment, and share the video around. Please check out my other social media like my Twitter, Twitch, and Tumblr. And consider checking below the video and donating to my Patreon, Streamlabs for my merchandise, or becoming a YouTube member, and you'll get rewards like this. Our name shoutouts come from Joey Jumbo122, DJ Skywalker, and Misty Phantom. Our full sentence shoutout comes from Buzzsaw the Righteous, who says, "A haiku for Josh. The combusting cloud burns with fiery passion. Josh Scorcher is great." Thanks for watching and supporting the show.